So we're back for another hybrid build project, this time with the GTX 1060. You might be asking, why would you put that under liquid? It's a GTX 1060, and the reason is because I want to. So there's a few things here. First of all, taking this apart will be a good opportunity to learn more about the board itself, beyond what we can just see by looking at the back of it, of course. So we're going to take it apart, look at the board. That's what this part of the video is for, is really just learning about the PCB itself. And then in the second part, we'll build up a hybrid card and run through some tests, look at thermals, things like that. So in terms of the thermals, we ran pretty extensive endurance tests with the GTX 1060. Before getting to the build, this coverage is brought to you by MSI and their new MSI GTX 1060 Gaming X, which comes pre-overclocked and has a Twin Frozr 6 heatsink. So we ran pretty extensive endurance tests on the GTX 1060 and the MSI Gaming X version of the 1060. In those endurance tests, in the article and in the review video to some extent, I show a couple of interesting data points. So one is over the period of our 2+ hour burn-in, we see that the Founders Edition card, this one, has some spiky performance like that. It's a small spike, but it is a spike, and that does actually very slightly impact clock rate. Where it impacts clock rate more heavily is when there's these sudden, really hard drops, and we can put the graphs on screen for that. But those hard drops with the FE card fall down to 150-ish megahertz from the original clock rate of whatever it happened to be at the time, 1700 plus in some instances. So when you fall more than 1,000 megahertz, has 1 gigahertz fall in the operating clock, there's a pretty sudden and observable spike in frame rate. That'll be a stutter or frame drop or whatever colloquialism you want to use. So that was somewhat resolved with the aftermarket coolers in the past. When we did these hybrid mods, we were able to eliminate those hard drops completely. But if you look at the MSI card's performance, which we also endurance tested, you'll see that it does not have these smaller spikes at the front of the chart. It's actually almost perfectly flat, and it does have the hard falls, but it gets rid of the smaller ones. And so that, I think, is partly because of the thermal solution, even though this one is pretty decent comparatively to the other FE cards. And that's just because GP106 is a lot lower TDP and not quite as hot of a chip. So two reasons for doing this. One is because we want to look at it and it's fun. And two is because it might actually improve things in some regard. We might be able to get rid of some of those drops. I do not think we're going to see a huge change in overclocking, but in the past, with the AMD RX 480 when we did this, and with whatever card we just did before that, the 1080, we did actually see some legitimately sizable increases in the overclocking ability, and that was mostly in the form of an extra 100 megahertz with 1080 and an extra 50 megahertz with the RX 480. I didn't even look at this. So like the previous cards, I haven't taken this apart yet. That means I'm not 100% sure of how it goes together or what we're getting into with this card. But the one thing we do know is that the back plate here is, if you look right here at these 4 screws, these larger ones, these are going through the PCB and holding the heatsink in place. So the heatsink is going to be an alloy / copper heat pipe amalgam that's used to cool the GPU, of course, and then flanking that will be whatever's used to cool the VRM, the VRAM, likely the base plate of the card. Oh, there's a screw there. Normally there's not 2 sets of screws like that. Stupid Pokemon theme song. Oh, let's take these out. I didn't change the screw. Oh, there it goes. Something's separating. Oh, there's a screw right here. I didn't see that one. Need that. 2 more up top. So it looks like it's about to separate. Yeah, there it goes. So there's the shroud. Let's disconnect the LEDs. Now, some reports out there did say that there were no LEDs on the 1060. I've seen both LEDs and non-LEDs reported. Ours, for whatever it's worth, does have an LED for the GTX text there at the top, which is just powered by this cable, simple 2-pin cable that goes into the board and powers that. So we're going to set that aside. That's the shroud. It looks like this did not necessarily need to be unscrewed, but I think when we install the liquid cooler, it might be helpful to have them separated anyway. And at this point, it looks like there's just a Phillips head right there that I can take out to separate them completely, but we'll leave that, oh, 2 more down here. We'll leave that there for now. We've got a very similar heatsink to the 1080 and 1070, where it's got this sort of arched out look to it, and that conforms with the VRM fan. This pattern right here, this plastic molding, is helping guide the airflow into the heatsink and through where it's ejected out the back of the card, and that's very standard blower design cooling solution. This is just some kind of cheap, it's not a plastic, but that top is just a covering. It doesn't actually, I don't think it's actually functional. It's the stuff underneath that matters, and we'll get there in a moment. If you look at all this ketchup and mustard wiring in here, that is what allows the 6-pin to be located off of the PCB. So you see the 6 pins right there, but if you look at this is the PCB. The PCB terminates right there. I think this card is almost 10 inches fully across, and that is, I believe, like 6.75 or something. So it terminates early, but NVIDIA didn't want to put a PCI header in the middle of their card. So you can see these solder points, 2 solder points here, and then the wires for those points are here, and they're extending out this way, which allows the pass-through effectively for power to come into the card. What's this for? Does that even have intake? I'm curious about what this does too. We'll see when we get in there. I guess there's really no components down there because the PCB doesn't exist. So maybe it's just cooling for the power. I'm not sure how hot that stuff gets, but if you look here, this gives the appearance that, and it's correct, that these are fins. So these are aluminum fins. So it gives the appearance that air can come in through here and then get pushed through the VRM fan. That's how you would think it would work. And in a case like that Origin Chronos, where we had some thermal issues on the GPU, I thought that this exposure would have benefited because it was closer to the ventilation. But if you look here, this sort of ridge line that I'm pointing out right now, this ridge line is actually solid. So down in the card, there's a wall. There's no way for any wind effectively to get through there. It looks like anyway. So it may be cooling something. It might be functional. It might be mostly cosmetic. But if it's cooling anything, it's probably the PCIe connector, which is probably one of the hottest parts of the card, of course, just because that's where all the power is going in for the most part. So cool stuff. Let's take the heatsink off and look at the rest. I guess we want the plate off. So that is secured by these screws. Do we have to take this off? Yeah, we do have to take this off to get the heatsink out. So I want to leave the base plate intact this time to make things a little easier. I don't think we need the extra VRAM cooling, and in theory it'll be a more efficient VRM cooler anyway. But we're still going to take it off completely just to look at what the card looks like, and then I'll put it back on before we build the hybrid model completely. All right, there we go. There are no heat pipes in here. Someone said there were heat pipes, but that appears to be incorrect. I don't know if the camera will be able to see down there, but if you kind of look down the fins, you'll see that there are actually there's nothing in there. So that goes clean through. It's just aluminum fins. Copper cold plate. There are no copper heat pipes. And that's our cooling solution. really not great, but obviously it's doing the job just fine because this is a low TDP chip, 120 watt TDP. The heat generation is pretty low. We were hitting 70 something Celsius max, 71C with the auto pre-configured settings. This is plainly a cooling solution for the VRM components, and we've got chokes, MOSFETs, things like that, and then underneath will be the VRAM. I'm going to grab something to clean off that module though first, or the silicon rather. All right, so just as many of you know, just rubbing alcohol will pretty much instantly remove. The compound won't cause any damage, and it dries almost instantly. This is GP106-400. As an FYI, the GTX 1080 is GP104, and the 1070 is GP104, but they also have a suffix, -200 and -400. So this is GP106-400. There may be, in the future, a GP106-200. If such a thing exists, it would probably be maybe a GTX 1050 or something like that. But that's the silicon. That is the GPU. This is the substrate, that green thing right there. That's what you call a substrate. Let's get this cold plate off to look at the rest of it, though, or the base plate. It might be just held on by this at this point, the expansion slot. Okay. Oh, backside. All right, so I'm going to use some anti-static tape for a very simple purpose. One, it's anti-static, so we don't have to worry about it causing damage. Two, these screws are slightly different size than the other ones. I don't want to forget where they go. So I'm just going to tape them into their location where they belong, and that way they won't leave it when I'm ready to reassemble this thing later. Okay, that's the expansion cover with the tessellation and all that uselessness. So did that actually do anything for us, or was it a waste of time? Oh, it did do it. Okay, so there is the separation. What are we stuck to? We are stuck by the wires. I think that's annoying. I think this is where we can detach this part of the heatsink. All right, there's the heatsink, or something anyway. Oh, that's gonna be fun to put back together. So that goes in here, something like that. Not exactly, but you get the idea. And then this has now separated. We got a huge connector soldered straight to the pins. You can see that the black ones are ground, so we've got 2 ground or sense pins, and the rest are hot. So that has allowed us to separate these, I think. Oh, except for the fan, we gotta detach the fan first. So if you look in here, you'll see that this twisted pair cable is actually going to the fan, connected by a header that's kind of socketed and latched in there. So we're gonna just kind of push it and then see if it pulls up. You really do not, don't pull by the cables if you can avoid it. I'm trying to pull by the base here. Not that you should be copying any of this, to be honest. I'm sure there's far better ways to do this once the teardown is a more known process. There it goes. This goes in there. I don't know what that does. It's my phone. Hold the code anywhere on the screen to focus. Maybe it's just an inventory number. What we've got here is VRAM thermal pads, which are connecting with a little piece of aluminum or something under each pad, which is actually pretty good design. So a little plate under each one of these. You can actually kind of see it there if I expose the corner. So the VRAM is making that, or the thermal pad's making that contact to the VRAM. Obviously a GPU goes here. These just got stuck on, but you can see where there were more of them, and those are still on the board. So these are attached to parts of the power phasing setup, the VRM, MOSFETs, things like that. And what else do we have that's of interest? I guess we can point out the VRAM itself, of course. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 gigabytes, 1 gigabyte chips. And just as a reference, they are Samsung, and they are actually the same chips used in the RX 480, the -HC25, I think is what that number says. Same, more or less the same chips, if not the same exact chips as in the RX 480. You can see there's 2 spots here that were kind of discussed by another vendor. Those 2 slots do not have chips in them. That does not really mean anything. It just means that the same a PCB was used and they didn't want to redesign it. They just left those blank. So that's what we got. Let's, it's kind of weird being tethered like this. You can see ground soldered in, electrical, and 2K caps with, I forget what the other one is. I don't remember if that's 5 or 10, but we've got 2K caps for sure. And I think that's really it. This board's pretty simple and small. So at this point, we can start getting ready to mount a liquid cooler to it. So that's the teardown. That's what we got in there for the card. The way this is going to go back together in the next segment, we are just going to reassemble this part. I think I've got everything figured out where it goes again. So reassemble that. This will help dissipate the heat on the VRM. So hopefully that will be beneficial to us so we don't have to mount 1,000 tiny aluminum and copper heat sinks like we did on the RX 480. And it should theoretically work pretty well because we already have seen this cooler performs pretty well. So I'll mount that if it will support this. If it doesn't, then I'm going to go with probably the Arctic cooling solution again, this thing. But no matter what, I'm going to mount one of the, actually, let's just check right now before we sign off on this video and see whether this will fit. These are the best possible solutions for closed loop liquid cooling that I've tested right now, because that protrusion, I just show you again, even though we've done it in every video, that protrusion down there really helps with the flat surface of a GPU as opposed to the more curved surface of a CPU, which has different hot spots. You want that flat surface. The protrusion will help sink the heat so that it's actually sinking a significant amount of heat, saturating across the surface before the pump pushes the liquid in here through the micro fins on the other side of the cold plate. We'll take one of these apart sometime soon and show you what that looks like, but that's the idea. Let's see if the pins will fit. Yeah, that might actually work, maybe. We'll see. It could work. We'll find out in the next video. So that's it. That's it for the teardown. Now you know what the GTX 1060 looks like. Let's do this correctly so I don't ruin the thermal paste. I don't know what the 1060 looks like on the PCB and the chip itself. Next video will be the build-up. We'll work on testing and things like that, see if there's any elimination of those spiky clock rates, and the temperature should fall to, I would think, 18 Celsius or lower for the delta T value load, which is pretty damn low. The reason I picked that number is because that's what our 1080 hybrid hit, was about 18 Celsius delta T, and this is a much cooler chip, so I'm curious to see how low it goes. But Patreon link in the post video. If you want to help us out directly, you can hit the channel name below if you want to see our GTX 1060 review, RX 480 hybrid build, 1080 hybrid build, things like that. Subscribe for more content so you get the next part of the series, and I'll see you all next time.